On Higgins, sailors tightened their grips on railings and kept their eyes locked on the approaching hulls. Orders were clear: steady course, steady speed, no weapons armed, no guns raised. To an outsider, it might seem unthinkable that the most powerful navy in the world would endure this without response, but that is the reality of modern standoffs. Strength is not only about how much firepower a ship carries, but how much restraint its crew can maintain when provoked. The standoff stretched on, second after second, until every minute felt like an hour. Chinese frigates pressed closer, circling tighter, their maneuvers echoing past confrontations the world had already seen. In 2018, the USS Decatur was nearly sideswiped when a Chinese destroyer cut across its bow at just 45 yards, a reminder that these close passes are not accidents, they are strategy. This morning, the same playbook unfolded. A Chinese warship cut dangerously near Higgins, a few hundred yards at most. At sea, that distance vanishes in a heartbeat. One wrong move, one mechanical failure, and two steel giants could collide with catastrophic consequences. On the bridge of Higgins, the calm held. Orders were steady, almost mechanical. Maintain speed, hold course, keep communications brief. The sailors obeyed, every eye locked on the gray hulls that edged too close. Their training demanded composure, but their bodies betrayed. The strained hands tightened around railings, shoulders stiffened. It was restraint under pressure, discipline as the only barrier to escalation. Everyone on board knew what their ship carried: 96 vertical launch cells, each capable of loading Tomahawk cruise missiles, Harpoon anti-ship missiles, or SM-2 interceptors. Enough firepower to overwhelm anything the Chinese had placed in the area, and yet that power remained sealed beneath steel hatches. To use it here, in this moment, would not only sink a handful of ships, it could unleash a chain reaction drawing in two nuclear-armed superpowers, and with them, more than 1.7 billion lives across both nations. That morning, strength wasn't measured in salvos fired or weapons raised. It was measured in the discipline to hold back. The burden of restraint weighed heavier than the destroyer's 9,200 tons of steel. In the quiet endurance of Higgins, America sent its message: real power is not only in the arsenal you command, but in the control you choose to exercise. To the untrained eye, the USS Higgins looked passive, silent, cornered. But below its steel decks lay an arsenal that could change the course of nations in less than an hour. 96 missile tubes sat ready in its vertical launch system. Some carried SM-2 interceptors, others held Tomahawks with a range of over 1,000 miles. Its phalanx close-in weapon system could spit out 4,500 rounds per minute, shredding any incoming missile or aircraft. And its SPY-1D radar tracked more than 200 contacts at once with unblinking precision. The Chinese captains weren't blind to those numbers. Their own ships carried serious firepower. Type 052D destroyers armed with YJ-18 anti-ship missiles, supersonic killers with nearly 300 miles of reach. Alongside them, Type 54 Ampere frigates added more missile tubes and more guns, creating the image of overwhelming numbers. But numbers alone were deceiving. Every move the Chinese flotilla made was tracked, not just by Higgins, but by satellites overhead and U.S. submarines hidden beneath the waves. In a real exchange of fire, Beijing's ships could have been reduced to burning hulks in under 15 minutes. That's why the provocation was so dangerous. It wasn't about who had the bigger stick, it was about who would break first. While destroyers and frigates circled in silence, another drama was unfolding just a few miles away, one far more human and far more heartbreaking. Over 40 Filipino fishing boats were working the reefs that morning. For them, Scarborough Shoal wasn't a battlefield, it was a lifeline. Wooden boats, barely 50 feet long, carrying families who had fished those waters for generations. Each catch meant food on the table and money to keep children in school. Then the Chinese Coast Guard arrived. Cutters and militia vessels swept in with sirens blaring. Water cannons unleashed torrents strong enough to smash glass and rip nets clean off decks. Wooden boats were rammed, some nearly capsized by steel hulls displacing thousands of tons. Radios crackled with insults, branding the fishermen as trespassers in their own waters. One fisherman later described it simply, "They chased us like we were vermin." By noon, dozens of boats had been forced back, their nets ruined, their catch lost. For villages along the coast, that meant hunger, debt, and despair. And all of this unfolded in defiance of international law. In 2016, a tribunal ruled Scarborough Shoal lies within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. Yet on that morning, paper rulings meant nothing against steel ships and water cannons. From the deck of the Higgins, American sailors could see the spray in the distance. They could do nothing. Their mission was restraint. But the image fishermen humiliated while a superpower's destroyer held fire was one the world was never meant to see. Scarborough Shoal itself is little more than a ring of reefs and rocks. On a map, it looks insignificant, but in reality, it sits at the heart of one of the most critical arteries of global trade. Every year, more than $3.5 trillion worth of goods pass through the South China Sea. That's nearly a third of all global maritime commerce. Over 60,000 merchant vessels use these waters annually. Oil tankers alone carry more than 15 million barrels of crude every single day, fueling economies from Japan to South Korea to the United States. Whoever controls these waters doesn't just control shipping lanes. They hold the power to delay, to divert, or even cut off supplies that entire nations depend on. It's not about reefs or fishing rights. It's about leverage, economic warfare without firing a shot. For the United States, the stakes couldn't be higher. If the Philippines, a treaty ally, is left to face rammings and water cannons alone, what does that say to Japan, South Korea, or Australia? China broadcasts every confrontation as a victory, a propaganda tool to undermine trust in Washington's promises. That's why Higgins was there. Not to fire, not to escalate, but to prove the United States still has steel in the water, still willing to defend the principle that no single nation can choke the world's trade routes. Scarborough Shoal has become more than a reef. It's a symbol of two futures, one ruled by law, the other ruled by force. As the hours dragged on, the world held its breath. Chinese destroyers pressed closer, their captains taunting over open radio. Filipino fishermen limped home, humiliated and empty-handed. And the USS Higgins, armed to the teeth, stayed its course in silence. No missiles launched, no guns fired. Yet that silence carried more weight than thunder. For every sailor on deck, the humiliation stung. They knew their destroyer, alone, carried more firepower than entire regional navies. They knew if the order came, those Chinese warships would be turned to wrecks in under 15 minutes. And still, they held back. This was the paradox of power in the 21st century. Victory isn't always measured in battles won. Sometimes it is measured in patience, in proving that law and restraint are stronger than reckless provocation. Higgins didn't retreat. It didn't yield. It stood steady, steel against steel, discipline against arrogance. Scarborough Shoal became more than a reef that day. It became proof that the fight for the world's oceans won't always be decided by firepower, but by who can endure without breaking. Scarborough Shoal may look like nothing more than rocks and shallow reefs, but on the 13th of August, 2025, it became the stage for a global test, a test of power, of pride, and of patience. China pushed hard. Its warships closed in, its Coast Guard harassed fishermen, its propaganda declared victory. But the United States answered with something Beijing did not expect: silence, control, and unshaken presence. The USS Higgins showed that America doesn't need to fire a shot to send a message. Sometimes, the strongest warning is the one that never explodes. The stakes go far beyond fishing grounds. Whoever controls the South China Sea controls trade, energy, and the balance of power for an entire region. If intimidation wins here, it will echo across the world. But if restraint, law, and presence hold firm, then peace still has a chance. That August morning proved a hard truth. Peace is fragile. It survives only when those strong enough to defend it choose not to look away. And if you value truth, strategy, and analysis, make sure you hit subscribe and join us for more. Because the next clash at sea could decide far more than a reef. It could decide the future of global order.